Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the home theater geek. Welcome to this week's episode, all about the Value Electronics TV Shootout 2022. My guests today are Robert Zohn, owner of Value Electronics. Hey, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. So happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Always happy to have you on the show, and I always love this shootout, so I'm really happy we're going to be talking about it today. Also with us is Jason Dustal, training manager at Murideo, who was deeply involved in the shootout. Hey, Justin, welcome.
Hey, guys. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And finally, we have David Mackenzie, CEO and compressionist of Fidelity in Motion and a deep expert in all things video. David, always great to see you.
Thanks for having me here.
You bet. So this was the, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, the 19th annual Value Electronics TV Shootout.
Well, I think actually it's the 19th year. I created it in 2004 to go public, but it really was only our 18th one because we missed 2020.
We missed, yeah. And it was held July 30th and 31st of this year in New York City,
correct.
Right?
That's correct. Thank you.
So give us a little bit of history of the event.
Well, I started doing this because I was interested personally in understanding the picture quality element differences of all the premium TVs. And I wanted to learn who was the best at color fidelity, color saturation, motion resolution, detail. So I started doing this myself in the store with some calibrators. And then in 2004, we took it public because I thought it'd be great to show the world what we've been doing behind the scenes. So that's when it went public. That was our first event. And of course, for the first few years, it was mostly plasma TVs.
Mm-hmm. I remember plasma TVs.
My back remembers lifting plasma TVs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. So in those days, I guess you did it at your store, right?
Yes, that's correct. We did. For quite a few of the years, we did it.
Yeah. And then for a few years, you did it at CE Week, which was sort of a mini CES held in New York in the summer.
That's correct as well. And that was because Joel Silver once said to me off camera, and then he said it on camera. He said, I'm so proud of you for producing and coming up with the concept of doing this and now putting a reference panel in a monitor in there. He says, I'm so glad that you realize that this event is even bigger than you are. So we had to move to a larger venue to accommodate the growth of this.
Right. But now it's back at your store. Am I correct? No, I take it back. Where was it this year?
We did it in New York City, again, for the second time, at a beautiful facility, a luxury facility. The building is called The Company. It's at 335 Madison Avenue. We had the entire 7th floor. We had a city block long outdoor balcony where we served cocktails in the afternoon. We had a very, very large conference room. We had our own private restaurant. It was really very luxurious.
Wow. Now, in the past, you've been able to invite interested consumers, and you've got a large crowd. Since the pandemic, I think you've limited it more in terms of who's there.
Yes, right? I'm sorry, we're not open to the public. We bring in the judges, most of which fly in from Hollywood or all over. So it's judges, presenters, and the media. And in the last 2 years, we've had a lot of YouTube channel owners. So we have a total of maybe 50 people, but the occupancy is much greater. The conference room is rated at 100. So we have good social distancing and plenty of room there.
Well, plus you have to have room for all those TVs.
You're not kidding. This year we have more TVs than ever.
Yeah.
And in the 8K event, day 2, we used all 85 to 88-inch class because I felt it would make a good reason to show the larger screens and the higher resolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see, Jason or David, I mean, any of you can answer this question. Tell us what TVs were there.
David, do you want to take it or I can take it?
You should go. You remember the model numbers better
Yeah.
than me.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Let me take a crack at this because every year we have to memorize new model numbers, and I'm probably going to
Yeah,
have you, but
that's for sure.
I still remember model numbers from like the early 2000s. It's absolutely silly. But,
I do too, actually.
and while we're on that sort of subject, I remember service code menus a lot of those too.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh, that's serious.
Display 5, volume up, power. I mean, just silly stuff.
Yeah.
So if we're going from left to right on the 4K day, and Robert, maybe check me on this if you have the list in front of you, but I believe the Samsung S95B,
which is the QD OLED.
Yes.
Correct. I think next was next the A95, the Sony hybrid.
Yes.
And then there was, I think, the reference monitor. Again, I'm going off memory here.
Correct.
And then the LG C2.
Correct.
And then the
wait, it was the G.
I'm sorry, G2. Thank you. Yeah. And then there was another Samsung.
Nope, it was Sony.
It was the Sony, right? And that was the mini LED, right?
X95K, correct.
The X95, yeah. The A and the X keep messing me up because of both 95.
I know, yeah.
The X, and then the last one at the very end, was that not the other Samsung?
It was a QN95B.
That's it.
Which they only very recently decided to thankfully bring into the US.
Mm-hmm.
It was initially just for the UK and Europe. So that's a new high-end flagship from Samsung.
But flagship in terms of being a mini LED backlight LCD TV.
Yes, but it has the processor that they use in the QN900B. It has a native to 144 hertz, so gamers like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got the upgraded processor and the panel itself as well.
Okay,
it's a beautiful TV.
I'm sure it is.
Yes,
and we're going to get to how they all performed here in a minute. But first, I failed to mention this, and I should have first, which is who was there. We were talking earlier. You had about 50 people there, and I don't want to mention everybody who was there, but. Let's talk first about the calibrators, because this is an important aspect of this entire event, because you take all the TVs that are in contention and you have them fully calibrated.
Yes, we do.
Which is really important, in my opinion, to put them all on a level playing field.
Thank you.
So who was there to do the calibration?
Well, it was John Rifamato, who's ISF level 3, of course, and he assists with Joel Silver in a lot of classes as well. And he has been with us for more than a decade, calibrating high volume of TVs with us. It was Dwayne Davis, who is known as D-Nice.
D-Nice on AVS Forum.
Yes.
Well-known AVS Forum member.
Yes. And it was Jason as well, who supported us as well as calibrated a couple of TVs. And those were our 3 calibrators. And of course, they attended the event. There were a few more ISF calibrators there as well, because some of the YouTube channel owners became level 3 calibrators as well. So we had some other ISF calibrators in the audience attending. And then we had all the engineers flew in from Japan and South Korea, from the top engineers from Samsung Display were there. One of the creators of the QD OLED attended in person. We had LG's very top engineers and top executives from the US attending in person, as well as Sony. Very well attended from headquarters engineers as well as US executives from the participating companies.
Yeah. Now, so we had calibrators, we had representatives from each of the companies, engineering representatives.
That's correct. Yes.
And we also had a series of judges who were there to actually evaluate, take a look at what these TVs were doing, and evaluate them on a very clearly laid out set of parameters, which we're going to talk about. But who were the judges?
Thank you. I'm most proud of our judges. We did a great job this year. Some of them were flown in from Hollywood. They're color graders and film finishers and video specialists and technicians that work on the films to master them for Blu-ray, for movie theaters, and they sign off on them. We had the top picture quality expert from Warner Brothers, HBO, David Medina. He never misses a TV shootout, and he's been a judge with us for many years. We had his counterpart from, where's Ken from again?
Ken is from Viacom/MTV.
MTV. He signs off on all of the content that's been graded properly.
Ken, just a quick little cool tidbit. Ken worked on the original Real World series, so he's been there a long time.
This is Ken Almestica, I believe.
Thank you. That's right. Yeah. We had David Medina, I told you about, who is the production technology operations manager for HBO, Warner Brothers. Let's see. We had David Mackenzie, who's with us today.
One of the judges. I'm going to ask him about the judging process here in a minute.
Yep. And you know that he's a very well-known compressionist, Fidelity in Motion. Let's see. We had Ed Johnson, who's a level 3 calibrator and a very serious enthusiast and an engineer himself. We had Giles Sherwood. He's with us every year as well. He's the director of post-production for Criterion, and I have pushed him and the owner, Jonathan Terrell, for many years to produce 3D Blu-ray discs. And thankfully, he was able to do them, and we're now seeing Criterion with their world-famous movies in 3D. He was on a panel of expert judges. I'm never good at pronouncing this name, Ilya, and he's a colorist. And
Ilya Akitoshi.
Yes, and he's a well-respected post-production colorist. Let's see. We said Jason Dustal, but he didn't vote. Oh, we had Jeff Hagerman.
Hagerman, right.
As well, yeah. He's terrific. He was very excited to do this. He has 3 of the BVM HX310s, so he's very familiar with that grading panel. And he was very active contributing and very excited to be part of it. He was new for us this year. We had John Rifamato, who's a very highly educated electrical engineer who is also a level 3 calibrator.
Right. He was doing some of the calibration for this event.
Yes. He was the only calibrator who was actually on the panel of judges as well. And we mentioned Ken already, right?
Yep.
I think that rounds out.
So it's a really incredible slate of
what
we often call golden eyes.
Yes.
People who really know what they're looking at.
Thank you.
In terms of video quality, color, shadow detail, all the parameters that I'm going to ask David to talk about here in a minute. Before we do, though, I want to make sure we also mention that you had an MC at the event, which I have had the honor of doing in the past, and I'm sorry I couldn't do it this year.
I know.
Because that was really a lot of fun. But this year it was Caleb Dennison from Digital Trends, and he's also really very good. So
he sure is. You bet.
I'm sure he did a great job of emceeing. And perhaps most importantly, or at least as importantly, we're going to be showing some photos from the event. And these were all taken by Mark Jessamy, who has been also a longtime photographer for the event, right?
That's correct.
And we thank him very much for allowing us to use his photos for this podcast. And I'm sure you're posting them on your website and so on. He really does an amazing job, as we will see.
Thank you.
So we went over the models. In fact, let's take a look at graphic number 1, which lists them again.
Right. And again, that's the 4K models.
These are the 4K. We're only talking about the 4K,
right.
which was the first day of 2 of the shootout. So if we can take a look at graphic number 1, we'll see them listed. And I listed them this way.
Very good.
With the model number and the technology, which is important because we have a new technology this year. Yes. The first time in how many years have we had a new television technology available?
Since WRGB came out in 2013.
That's right.
So it's 9 years. 9 years.
9 years, and now we have quantum dot OLED or QD OLED, which is the next generation of quantum dot technology. Quantum dots have been used in TVs for a number of years now in the backlight. Now, in this case, they're being used essentially as replacements for the color filters. They are
That is correct.
converting the blue light from the OLED
That is
backlight
correct. Yes.
into red or green, which is really, really interesting. And I also included in that graphic, I wanted to make sure everybody understood, was the MSRP of each of these TVs. And some of them are on some sale when I looked them up a couple days ago on the Samsung or Sony websites. So they're a little bit off from that. But what's amazing to me, and I'd love to get your take on this, all of you, is here's a brand new technology. And normally they come out and they're really expensive. New technologies are generally expensive. Not really so in this case. David, what is your thought on that?
Well, I just had a thought there. This is actually the QD-OLED panels and the Samsung and Sony QD-OLED displays. They're both manufactured by Samsung Display, and it dawned on me after the whole shootout was done, that actually marks Samsung Display's return to manufacturing emissive displays since they stopped plasma in, I think it was 2014.
That's right.
So if I left the shootout and I'm like, wow, it feels like something is right with the world again now that Samsung Display is back in the emissive. Well, they're manufacturing displays for smartphones and stuff, but now they're making television-sized emissive display panels.
Yes, yes. It was dominated really by LG in the OLED category up till now, and now Samsung has the market really on this QD OLED. But how can it be that a new technology isn't tremendously more expensive than current technology? Any thoughts?
Is it an entirely? Yeah, sorry, I totally dodged your question.
Yeah, you dodged my question.
Is it an entirely new technology though? It's a refinement of OLED.
It is a refinement of OLED, but OLED, traditional OLED, has a white, a red, a green, and a blue subpixel, and the red, green, and blue subpixels are actually color filters.
That's right.
There's light from essentially a white OLED background passing through color filters for each of the subpixels. And now we have blue OLED light passing through a quantum dot layer instead of a color filter. And the quantum dot layer converts that blue light into green or red. And in the case of the blue subfilter, it's subpixel, it's just basically a clear filter. There's some filtering going on, polarization maybe or something, but basically letting blue light through from the backlight. So it really is. Yes, it's an evolution rather than a revolution, shall we say? But it's still something pretty brand new. And I'm not used to seeing, if we put that graphic up one more time, seeing a QD OLED at $3,000 and an OLED at $2,900 and a mini LCD at $2,800 or $3,500. They're all in roughly the same price range.
That's right.
Jason, what do you think?
I vividly remember $25,000, $30,000 plasmas, and
Right.
I mean, at this point, I'm 19, 20 years old and just really, really getting into this stuff. But I remember 77-inch, $14,000 OLEDs, and just, and I'm with you, Scott. I mean, it was kind of mind blowing. You know, I'm thinking, okay, this 65-inch quantum dot OLED hybrid, it's probably going to be $7,500 or something in that ballpark. And when I saw the MSRP at $4,000, I even thought to myself, I'm like, man, I think I might even be able to afford one of these. So it was, you know, it was just unbelievable. And to your point, and you nailed it, it was very, in a great way, shocking to see the MSRP on it. And we all know what's going to happen with that. You know, Black Friday deals are going to happen, and just over time. And Robert might agree with me here, but, you know, in next year's shootout, these TVs might be $3,000.
That's right.
So the average person who wants to buy a nice TV can very easily do that and get all these benefits of these hybrids and all these refined technologies, and get something with perfect black that's also 1,000 nits. And these types of specs and the things that we're seeing right now were unobtainable technology-wise, much less price-wise. And here we are. You can get them for $4,000 or less. It's pretty cool.
Yep.
If I may add something to this, please.
Please, Robert, please.
Thank you. So because the prices are so compelling and aggressive, and because the technology advancements are so great, picture quality is so greatly improved, prices are down, people that normally would buy a mid-tier or a lower tier, and because of shows like this, where we educate and spread the word, they're stepping up to the premium products because they're affordable and getting a much better entertainment experience in their homes. So this is such a great technology advancement to see the very best color generating technology, quantum dot, that actually changes the frequency of the light waves. And to see them combine it with the best emissive technology, OLED, is just brilliant. So we had the Sony engineer that actually was instrumental in the development of quantum dot fly in from South Korea. And at the end of the event, I called those two engineers up to congratulate them separately on having the top 2 best TVs in the 4K shootout.
Yeah.
So they came up and stood on stage with me.
Yeah. That it's fantastic, really.
It really is.
Yeah. So we took a look at the list of the TVs that were there, and one thing we didn't mention, well, we sort of mentioned it, and I want to make sure it's very clear, that in addition to the 5 4K TVs that were on there, there was also a Sony reference monitor, the BVM HX310, which is only 31 inches. It's
That's right.
half the size of the competitors. It's a dual cell LED, LCD TV,
LCD.
and it costs $35,000. But it's really important, and Robert, I have to congratulate you again, and I think it's a wonderful thing you did there, and you've been doing, to put a broadcast monitor in with the contestants, because that's what people are looking at when they create the content.
Yes.
And so how do these TVs look compared to what the content creators saw when they were making the content? And that is...
Jason says it best.
Go ahead, Jason.
So
Whoa, careful. Something's really loud there, Jason.
Ooh, strange. I didn't do anything different, but hopefully this is a little bit better.
Yeah.
Maybe. That's strange. So I come into the shop, and the A95, the Sony, just happened to be at this moment in time right next to the 310. And Robert said, I mean, I'm carrying my backpack, I'm carrying luggage and gear. And Robert's like, come, throw all that on the floor. Come here. So I sit down in the seat. I'm probably 2 feet away from these 2 displays. And as long as I've been doing this and looking at different displays of different technologies and comparing them together and things like that, I'm looking at the 2, and normally within a few seconds, I can tell, okay, that one's got a little bit of a raised black compared to that one. The blue is a little different on that one compared to that one. And I sat there for several minutes with my jaw dropped, just thinking to myself, this is really bizarre that I can tell a very, very, very small difference between these 2 panels. And the, there are some things that you're going to notice, like, of course, on the bigger panel, maybe if there's a little bit of noise in there, you can see that a little bit easier compared to a panel half the size. But it was shocking on how close these 2 were to each other. I mean, even down to the black levels, to the average picture level, they were just as bright as each other. We looked at a few different pieces of content, and I was trying to tear it apart, and I just couldn't. It's really, really fun.
Actually, yeah, we just saw a comment pop up on the screen here. Horizon Brave is asking wonder which mid-tier brands will adopt the QD OLED technology next. It's a very good question, and undoubtedly somebody will.
Yes.
Okay, so we've taken a look now at the contenders, and I want to ask, oh, how odd. My notes have somehow changed. Anyway, Jason, let's start with you next to talk about how they were set up. They were right next to each other on stands. they had to be fed the same material, right?
They did, and we always do our best to get them at the same level. So as the judges are walking by and looking at each TV, they're pretty much centered with the middle of the screen, with all of them going across, and that can get a little tricky because the way the stands work and the height of each TV, and if one's a slightly bigger bezel, and so just getting them measured out is a little bit of a challenge. But luckily, we had some folks there. B, the installer. He's very, very talented. He got those nice and level for us pretty well. I was working in the background with the electronics. So we had a couple of different sources.
Let's take a look at graphic number 2 while you're telling us.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. The two sources were our Murideo 8K 7G generator, which of course has a lot of 4K stuff on it too. And that's what we were looking at when we were looking at some of the test patterns. And then in input number 2 was the Oppo 203, which, that's still to this day considered, one of the best out there.
Yep. Even though Oppo doesn't make it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, of course, when that news broke a couple of years ago, we were all pretty heartbroken, but, that's still an extremely high-end player, even considering its age. So those two sources were going into input number 1 and input number 2 of our AV Pro Edge, model number is ACMX-88. That's an 8 input, 8 output matrix switch, full 18 gigabits per second. So each of the TVs was connected to one of the outputs of the matrix switch. And I was controlling the matrix switch with a PC, changing inputs and changing outputs and making sure all the switching was working. And then at the very end of the signal chain, I believe it was in the very last output, was a test monitor that we were using, just to make sure when I was queuing something up, I was on the right chapter and those types of things. And in between the different categories and the different clips we were playing, we were just putting up some SMPTE bars because everybody knows what those look like and everybody's seen them before. But that was sort of behind the scenes with all the electronics. And then our friend Brent McCall from Metra, he was able to supply the cabling for us.
Good.
Yeah. And so we were using a combination from source to the matrix switch. Those were, I believe, 2 meter, just regular passive copper HDMI cables, and feeding the outputs of the switch to the displays. We had some AOC cables, active optical cables, which are a hybrid between fiber and copper, which lets you go very long distances and things like that. So the hardware was from AV Pro Edge and Murideo, the Oppo player, and the cabling was supplied by our friends at Metra.
Excellent. So then the whole thing was calibrated. I mean, all these TVs were calibrated, and that was over several days. And somebody in the chat room here is mentioning something about, I heard some extremely low delta E values. That's Beatmaster in the chat room, our friend. And Jason, you probably have the most to say about calibration because you were there for a couple of days or a couple of TVs of calibration, right?
Yeah, and just so everybody's super clear on what the delta error means, it's a measurement or a value comparing a reference level versus what we were actually measuring on the TV. So naturally, a delta error of 0 would mean that color or that measurement was perfect. And of course, we don't live in a perfect world, and you're never going to see a delta error of 0. But there are some tolerances that we really like to see. When we look at something like the X310 from Sony, the reference monitor, of course, that's going to give very, very, very small delta errors. But when we have consumer models having just as low of delta errors as that monitor, it was incredible to see some of the numbers. So, in years past, if a display had a delta error of under 1.0, we were very, very happy. And in this event and some of the TVs in the past few years, we're starting to see delta errors of just insane numbers, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. And just seeing that on a consumer display is really unbelievable. And I think a lot of that really tied back to, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but why the race between these panels was just so incredibly tight, because the errors were very low and they looked a lot like the reference monitor. It was really cool to see that.
Which goes to your point before of saying, as when you walked in, you looked at the reference monitor, you looked at, I think, the Sony QD-OLED,
Yeah,
you couldn't see, it took you much longer than usual to notice a difference or to be able to say,
absolutely.
oh, this is different from that. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Right. This is a little off topic, but I'll mention it anyway. William Kramer in the chat room is saying, what device and software do you recommend for DIY calibration now that there's no CalMan license for enthusiasts?
So I can touch on that a little bit. There are a few pieces of CalMan software that you can buy right now as an enthusiast, and they refer to these as CalMan Home. So they make different versions of Home based on the brand of TV. So for example, there's CalMan for LG Home Edition, CalMan for Samsung Home Edition, Sony has one as well. And within those different home editions for each brand, you also do have capabilities to do some manual calibration. So that stuff still exists. And when you look at the pricing of some of these packages, it is really incredible what they're able to do for not a lot of money to the enthusiast. So the first place I would look is at some of these home editions that are offered by Portrait Displays. As far as light meters and signal generators, there's so many different ones out there. But what we're seeing a lot of enthusiasts doing, and people who are even getting into calibration, and this is kind of their first go at it, we're seeing meters for $800 to maybe $1,000 for some of the ones that are accurate for what people at home are doing and still fast, so they're not sitting there for several minutes just taking one reading
for each measurement. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And we've seen that before. But what's really cool is if somebody is really into this and they want to really make sure their own TV is accurate, you can get to a point where you're actually using two different meters. So one meter is a spectroradiometer. That's the one that gives you the most accuracy, but takes the longest to read. And then you have something like a tristimulus colorimeter, which is sort of the opposite. It's much faster at reading. It does a lot better in low light conditions, but it's not as accurate. So there's a trade-off depending on which type of meter that you're using. Well, the great thing is these days you can create what's called a meter profile. So in CalMan, you can take meter A with the accuracy. It takes some readings for you with that meter. And then meter B is the faster one. It takes the same readings and the same patches on the screen, and it creates an offset. So what's cool about this is you use the spectroradiometer for the accuracy, but you teach the colorimeter to how to be as accurate as the spectroradiometer
on that display.
On that display. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And to your point also there, you can make profiles for, let's say you have 4 different types of TVs in your home. You can create profiles for all 4 of them. So you're not just using a built-in one. So you know the accuracy is there. Now for the enthusiast, my perspective is a little bit different, because I remember when entry-level meters were a couple of $1,000s. But nowadays you can get these meters specifically I'm mentioning. So something like a X-Rite i1 Pro 3, and then marrying that up with like an X-Rite i1 display. And at this point you're talking like maybe $1,300 or so. But for the really hardcore enthusiasts, that's what a lot of those folks are doing right now. And then there's also another thing to look at too, and that's your test pattern generator. And again, there's a wide variety of that as well. Us at Murideo, we make one that's maybe a little bit more advanced than what an enthusiast might use. But with Portrait Displays, they make one called the Video Forge Pro that's very affordable. And in some of the displays, you're actually using their own internal test patterns. We see that a lot with computer monitors too. So the investment these days versus, let's say, 10, 15 years ago is pretty cool to see. What people can get an entire package for right now is what we used to pay for just the signal generator, back in those days.
Back in the day, yeah, right.
Yeah, so those are a few that I would kind of start off with. Another one that's really popular too is from Portrait Displays. It's called a C6 HDR 2000. What's really unique about that, it retails for about $800. That one has a bunch of profiles already built in for different display types. So if you didn't want to spend, the extra money for 2 meters, you can get the 1 meter with a bunch of built-in profiles that are already there. And for most cases, for a do-it-yourselfer at home, that could be good enough. So, you know, the price of entry now is nowhere near what it used to be. And if you guys go take a look at the CalMan Home Edition, it's a very attractive price for someone who wants to play with this stuff at home.
Yeah, very good. Beatmaster in the chat room is reminding me, or clarifying, I should say, that when they were talking about delta E values in the chat room earlier, it was out of the box pre-calibration delta E values. Did you guys do any measurements of pre-calibration but to see where they were before calibration, and were they better than you might expect?
Yeah, we did. And, you know, it's always good to have the before and after, right? So we want to see the out of box performance versus the fully calibrated spend 2 hours, 3 hours on the TV performance. And, you know, kind of going back to what we were talking about before with TVs in the past, I mean, they were just all over the place, and we would just see these huge delta numbers, and then you calibrate them, and you know, if you were lucky, you'd get a low number, like maybe a delta error of 2, for example. Again, 1 is really incredible. We're seeing that in today's displays. Out of the box performance now is quite good. It's not perfect, and there still will be some visible changes once the display is calibrated, but they're so much better than they used to be. So looking at certain levels of grayscale and X and Y coordinates and luminance values when you're measuring gamma curves, and looking at RGB CMY values, they're pretty good. And then, you know, once you pick a better mode in the TV that gets you to that level, in most cases, when you use your light meter, you're really just doing some fine tuning, but it is still enough of a difference to where you will see it and it will be visible. So like, for example, in what we see in a lot of cases, when you take a TV out of the box and you start off with what we call a good mode, one that has all the adjustments that you need, and one that already has the color points and the white points a lot closer than, say, a vivid mode or standard mode.
And typically that mode would be called cinema or movie
Thank
mode.
you. Yes, you're absolutely right. And what we're seeing in some of these cases is the last thing you want to see, where the grayscale will track with too much green in it. And that becomes a very visible error, especially in the dark parts of the picture. And my example I always use is, you know, if you see Batman step out of the Batmobile, and his Batmobile or his outfit is a dark greenish black, you're going to see that from a mile away. And those are some of the things that we see right now. And sometimes it's not always extra green. Sometimes it's a little extra blue. And that's kind of the point of why you want to put the meter on the TV and really get it leveled out. So some of the errors will be more visible than others, but the errors are a lot smaller, to your point, but still far enough away to where they do need some love.
Just getting back to the enthusiast calibration for a second, Classy Tech Calibration says color space 0, ZRO, and a Raspberry Pi for a pattern generator. Have you used that before?
We have, and I'm glad he mentioned that, because the color space option is a very good option. A lot of people do like to go that route. If you compare that to CalMan Home, you know, they're both great programs. The Color Space 0 program does give the user a lot more flexibility on what they want to do, and being able to do things in whatever order they feel they like to do them in. And some of the 3-dimensional graphs that you can see in Color Space are really cool. They don't have some of the automation like CalMan has, but they're both very, very good options, and they're both at a very good price level. So I'm glad he mentioned that, because those two are really the ones that I have experience with, and both of those I would recommend for an enthusiast to check out.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on to, I want to make sure we talk about the judging criteria, the things that were set up for people to look at. And David, I'd like for you to take us through this as we go to graphic number 3. Here's the form that all the judges had in their hands, with each of the TVs listed, and this is the 4K shootout. Each of the TVs listed on the left, and then the various criteria that you were evaluating across the top. And there were 3 different modes that you were looking at. Tell us about this a little bit.
Yeah, so the SDR day mode, obviously at the top left there, you've got motion / DSE. It's interesting; those are actually grouped together. DSE stands for dirty screen effect. So I think the idea of Robert can maybe fill in here, but I think the idea of putting that in the motion category is if you have a panel that has any sort of non-uniformity running across it, like darker corners, which is kind of typical with the LCD-based technologies, or for OLED, actually OLED uniformity issues historically were more near low black, but are actually these days more to do with like in the brighter areas. You'll see that if you're watching, for example, something with fast motion, like a sports game where the camera pans across, those were grouped together. Motion resolution, obviously, as well. We used a lot of content from the old FPD benchmark software disk, actually. That was the clip with the cars and the
One of my favorite discs. So
yes.
No one can get it, but it's really good.
It's still used for a reason, put it that way. There's some nice 60 images per second content in there. I'm not saying 60p because it's interlaced, but fast motion content that'll actually stress all of these displays, because OLED and LCD are both sample and hold based technologies. So unlike a plasma or a CRT, there's no little gap of black in between each video frame. So historically, they've always kind of struggled with any kind of fast motion, even if the pixel response time on the panel is really fast, like it is on OLED. The combination of your eyes and brain still creates something that looks like motion blur, basically. Peak lumens, or peak luminance, we should say, because it's coming out of the screen. Really, I think the idea here is I think that was a fairly basic category, right, Robert? It was really for daytime use. Which of these panels can go brightest to really combat ambient light? Like, let's say you've installed it in a conservatory or other sort of. If you've installed a TV right beside a window and you watch TV like that a lot, which is the one for you?
Robert, this day mode was meant for evaluating the TV in the case of somebody putting it in a very bright room, and that's where it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be watched, and you want to see which one's going to do the best in that environment, right?
And correct. And we selected SDR because a lot of times it would be Sunday football, which is coming from cable, that's standard dynamic range.
Right.
So the HDR we preserve for low ambient light viewing. So typically you're watching football on a Sunday, it's afternoon time, there's ambient light in the room, and that's why that category was developed that way.
And so we had three parameters to look at there. We had motion and dirty screen effect. We had peak luminance,
yes,
brightness, and put up the graphic again, Chris,
upscaling.
And we'll see what it is. Oh, upscaling, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the idea there is that a lot of, upscaling performance doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to daytime viewing, but as Robert just said, I guess the idea there is that during the day, during the night, you might be watching movies from a higher res source. During the day, you might be watching cable TV, broadcast, something like that. So
sports are all going to be in 1080p or 720p.
Yes.
Or I don't watch a lot of broadcast TV, 1080i, right? Or
1080i.
Yeah. So for that reason, actually, I advised that one of the clips that got used was the I don't know if you're familiar with the original Spears and Munsell Blu-ray disc, the blue menu background. There's a great clip on there. It might be on the future disc as well, but we had what we had. It's a 1080i clip of a ship. And the whole idea there is to test the diagonal interpolation during the video mode deinterlacing. So
with the rigging, of the
it's
ship.
A handheld camera, and it made us all seasick because it's on all these big displays going back and forth. But because a interlace source can't maintain full vertical resolution through that kind of motion, and you have all those diagonal lines in the rigging, that's really. It can't be perfect because a lot of that pixel data is lost due to the interlacing process. It's just not in the signal. So the purpose of using that was to see how well can the TV conceal the jaggies you're going to get on these steep angles, but without losing detail. And I got to say, they all were doing a fairly similar job. I think they have this, that's the way of it, right? As interlaced content becomes less and less relevant, the performance kind of becomes the same, to the point that we don't have to worry much about it anymore. And of course, that's the hardest part of any kind of upscaling is video mode deinterlacing. Actually scaling spatial interpolation, that is taking a 1920 by 1080 source and expanding it to 3840 by 2160. That's really not any, manufacturers kind of act like there's some sort of, mythical, dark magic to this. It's really not. It's really just spatial interpolation. And with any kind of scaling, you kind of have it's best seen on I don't know if you remember the test pattern. I think it's the SimTRP 133, where it's a gray background with just various different resolution grades on it.
Oh yeah.
Any kind of scaling, if you're not doing one-to-one mapping, any kind of scaling is going to be a trade-off between creating a little ringing, which looks a bit like edge enhancement, but is different. Softening or aliasing. So there's a kind of trade-off between those three attributes. And again, I think in that regard, the performance is all pretty similar at this point between the displays.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we had SDR day mode, which is in bright environment. Then we have SDR reference mode, which I assume is in a dark environment.
Correct.
And
so yeah, the black level and shadow detail, we assess that in test patterns by looking at the either the 8-bit low pluge or dynamic range low pattern from the previous Spears and Munsell Blu-ray discs, and also the 10-bit version on the as of yet unreleased. I don't know exactly what it's going to be called, but the next version of Spears and Munsell is going to be a 3-disc set. Disc 1 is going to be dedicated to various different HDR formats. Disc 2 is going to be SDR and audio, and Disc 3 is going to be some demo material. So it's a big release. But Disc 2 has 10-bit SDR content on it, which is useful for looking at how these displays come out of black with a lot more granularity. Because obviously, if you use an 8-bit, we did both actually, but if you use an 8-bit dynamic range low test pattern, that's the one that it's mostly dark. And in 8-bit, you have like the flashing digital code value. So you have a patch that's code value 17, which is just above black, which you want to be just not clipped, but just visible. Then you have 18, 19, 20, and it should come out of black smoothly. But obviously in the 10-bit space, these panels are all HDR10 at least capable. So, and they better have video processing that's way above the 10-bit level to avoid introducing any other artifacts after calibration.
Right.
So anyway, all these panels are capable of more than 10-bit. So it was good to assess them with a test pattern that could take advantage of that.
And there were a couple other categories I just want to quickly touch upon. Color accuracy obviously is very important, and motion resolution, again, like in day mode, it's just how clear are the images of things in motion.
Right.
And then finally we have HDR reference mode, which is looking at high dynamic range content, and there we have a bunch of parameters. Many are the same: color saturation, color volume, how big the range of colors is, motion resolution, peak brightness, black level, shadow, many of the same categories, but here we're looking at high dynamic range content.
Right.
So,
I mean, the main difference in categories there is the 4,000 nit tone mapping, obviously. And the choice had been made actually in this shootout, Dolby Vision wasn't used. Everything going in was HDR10 actually.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Right. And I think I think it would be possible, depending on the configuration, to maybe Jason can do this more. Depending on the configuration, if you're sending let's say you have a Dolby Vision master disc and a UHD Blu-ray player, all the same metadata should get delivered to each display, and it's then up to the display, regardless of whether a display is capable of 1,000 nits, 2,000, or whatever it can do. It's the tone mapping then happens in the display, not the source. So in the future, it would be cool to see how they manage Dolby Vision as well. maybe that's a little preview of the next shootout. Who knows?
But there you go. All right.
4,000, not for me to say, 4,000 nits was picked for static metadata in HDR10 because there actually is it's the Dolby display, actually the Pulsar display that can in the studio that can display 4,000 nits. So the test we used there was actually part of the montage, the demo material on the most recent Spears and Munsell benchmarks.
disc.
Right, and it was the shot we picked there was that one of the horses in the snowy field, and again with tone mapping, I believe there's no standard for that. So it really is just down to the manufacturer on like what trade-offs they want to make to adapt a 4,000 nits image to a panel that can do 1,000 or 1,200 or whatever they're capable of now. And we saw that some of them would just like wash the entire snow out and just clip everything there, and preserve brightness at the expense of detail. Whereas others would go for a kind of overall less harsh look. And I believe also now, even outside of calibration, Sony, for example, there's now a menu option for like what you want the tone mapping curve to look like. Like, do you want to preserve more highlight details or do you want to preserve brightness?
Right.
But those are the trade-offs you get with any kind of.
Wouldn't that be great if there was a menu item that let you choose that?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
That's yeah.
Still in all, in the HDR reference mode judging, tone mapping is a critical element that I'm sure you guys all looked at very carefully. Beatmaster is asking, can you ask if the panel about Dolby Vision, what did they do to accommodate Samsung? Well, David just answered the question, which is you didn't look at Dolby Vision content. You just looked at HDR10 content.
Actually, I was a little distracted there. I saw a very good point coming from Classy Tech Calibrations, who said that if you, through a switch, if you send a Dolby Vision source, it will respond to what is effectively the weakest link in the chain. So if the Samsung display, which flat out will not accept Dolby or will not display Dolby Vision across the board, that will effectively downgrade, or it'll limit everything else to HDR10. So I guess the question is, how do we accommodate a non-Dolby capable display in a future shootout?
And likely Samsung will continue to be non-Dolby unless something changes at the company.
Yep.
Okay, let's take a look at a couple pictures from the actual event itself and how it was done. Here we see the TVs. Robert, why don't you tell us what we're looking at here?
Very good, thank you. This is the 4K HDR shootout, and we're looking at the 5 TVs. Directly in the center is the BVM 31-inch HX310 monitor. We're looking at the couple of Hollywood filmmakers over there, looking very closely and taking this very seriously to see how these beautiful flagship TVs compare to the reference. We always told the judges, if you ever want to know what the color is supposed to look like or the contrast, go back to the reference monitor and compare it to the reference monitor. So you can see them very focused and detailed. And this is with their critical eyes, judging the elements of each element of picture quality. So that I wanted to quickly, if I may, answer. I saw you put up a post that somebody said it's a shame about Sony only having 2 full HDMI 2.1 inputs. Just remember that HDMI 2.0B does everything 4K HDR up to 60 frames per second. If you want 120 frames per second, like gamers, or 8K, you need HDMI 2.1. If you want more HDMI 2.1 inputs on your Sony TV, we have a very nice, very effective switch, HDMI 3 in, 1 out, 2.1, the full bandwidth for $200. Or if you have an audio receiver, they have multiple 2.1 inputs. So it becomes a not issue. You have 2 inputs right now. It's more than enough. Everything is 4K HDR on all of the inputs up to 60 hertz, which covers everything that your TV would be viewing with the exception of some gaming.
Right. And it's a great point, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I thank you so much for that. We have a couple other photos from the process I just wanted to show. Here's another one with the 4K TVs and people looking at them. Here, obviously, they're looking at it in the dark mode.
Yes.
And here we have a bunch of people looking at it. I'm glad to see some of them were masked anyway.
Yes.
Have we had any COVID?
No, and it was mandated that you had to have proof of full vaccination.
Good.
And we recommended masks, and of course we gave them out to everybody.
Yeah, good. Okay. So you looked at clips, you looked at test patterns, and finally, here's the results. And we're showing the results right now. And, it's been published already. It's no big secret that we're waiting to reveal or anything. The Samsung S95B QD OLED won the shootout. Robert, tell us a bit about the scoring and how that happened.
Yeah, that was the Sony.
Oh, Sony. Sorry.
Thank you. A95K. They're both QD OLED.
Yeah. My apologies.
Samsung came in second. Not a bad showing.
Yeah.
Right. And LG with the G2 came in third. And then the mini LEDs, very, very, very close right behind it. Mini LED had such a big upgrade this year. The blacks are really deep and rich. They have so many more local dimming zones and more LEDs. They have outstanding control of the contrast. They really perform so much better this year than previous years.
Now, one category that you don't, or parameter that you don't have here that I just now thought of, and maybe it would be good to have, is off-axis performance.
I know.
Because the LEDs obviously would perform much more poorly than the OLEDs or the QD OLEDs in that particular way. Maybe that's kind of obvious and doesn't really need to be evaluated and not included in the ratings, because we know that LCD TVs have poor off-axis performance and OLEDs don't. So
that's right.
Okay,
they've also improved that quite a bit this year with mini LEDs, but still an OLED is going to give you a better off-axis performance.
Right. So as you say, the Sony came in first.
Yes.
Samsung QD OLED came in second.
Yes.
The LG OLED, WRGB OLED, regular, came in third.
Yes.
And then the two mini LEDs, 4 and 5.
Correct. Perfect.
So there you go.
All of it was very close. The first and the last were not that far apart.
Yeah, exactly.
The voting was very close.
Yeah.
These are
well, that's why you need these golden-eyed folks there to really make these fine distinctions. But look at those numbers. I mean,
this is the first year they've been this close. It's
really
a big spread. Yes.
I think, sorry if you don't mind me interjecting quickly, the biggest performance difference is between the emissive displays and the LCD displays.
Yes.
Right.
As it always is. Yes.
Yeah. And the difference between the emissive displays, the three emissive displays, is very small.
Right. QD OLED's like visibly better in terms of like peak luminance and off-axis viewing, but it's nothing compared to the difference between the QD OLED plus OLED versus the LCD displays.
Well, so there is the results of the 4K, which was the first day. And that, how long is that day, Robert? That's a long day, as I remember.
8.5 hours.
Holy smokes.
And then after that, we served beautiful cocktails out on our outdoor balcony. Press conference where we announced it. But the event was 8.5 hours.
Wow.
And everybody loved it and was enjoying every minute of those.
I'm sure that's true. And we have a picture of the winners of the 4K, which is the next slide, just so that we can show everybody. There you are with Rob Brennan from Sony, who's accepting the award.
Love that guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Who else is in this picture?
We have Pablo Espinoza, which is to our left and his right. And we have Alice, who is, I think, the chief financial officer of Dealerscope, CT Labs. Myself in the middle with Rob Brennan. We have Caleb Dennison,
the MC,
Master of Ceremonies from Digital Trends. And we have Jason Dustal.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
And Rob there is towering over you all, as I recall. Yeah, he's a big guy.
Yes, he is. Well, it takes a big guy to do a big job like that.
Well, true enough. I'll accept that. Absolutely. Okay, so let's go on to day 2 and the 8K contenders. Let's take a look at the next graphic here. There were only 3,
Yeah,
and they were all in the 85 or 88 inch range.
that's right.
Case of the LG. So we had 1 OLED and 2 mini LED LCDs, ranging in price from $8,500 for the Samsung,
Yeah.
$10,000 for the Sony mini LED, and $25,000 for the 88 inch Z2 OLED from LG. And again, go ahead.
Scott, and one thing to know is that the $25,000 price is down $5,000
Really, from where it was.
from where it was. It was $30,000 and sold well at $30,000.
Wow.
And it's a nice upgrade with a lower price. Everything is priced lower this year.
Well, as is with all things digital, I think, generally
Yes.
speaking. Okay, so let's take a look at the system diagram, because that was a little different.
Yes.
Jason, I think you started with looking at native 8K content, right?
Yeah, that was the first part of it. And here's where things get really tricky, is trying to distribute 8K throughout from a source into some different displays. We're very proud to say that we were the first to market with this specific product that you see on the front here. That's a DA14X, so 1 input and 4 outputs. The input was fed by the PC that Sony provided for us. There were some clips on the PC itself, and then we also had some native 8K HDR clips from our friend Florian Friedrich. They were playing from the PC, so that was our 1 input, and the 4 outputs were straight into each respective TV. And then the big question is how in the world do you get a 8K signal into a 4K reference monitor? And that's with our little ACSC1X, which is a very simple 1 input, 2 output. One of the outputs is a loop, but I don't know if you can see it very well in the picture, but there's a tiny little screen on the front of that little guy with a few buttons. So when you're setting up that SC1X, you go into the scaler menu, you tell it you want to go from 8K down to 4K. It takes about 30 seconds to set up, and that's how we were feeding the 4K reference monitor with 8K content. Okay. Cabling was the same as previously with our friend Brent from Metra. Right. And yeah, the big things that changed were we switched over to the PC for the content, and we had the little scaler feeding the Sony monitor. Everything else was direct.
Right.
And then that was one thing, looking at native 8K content, which very few consumers can actually see. And there's nothing being broadcast. I think there is some on YouTube, is there not?
There's some YouTube stuff. There's actually quite a bit of YouTube stuff now.
Oh, okay. All right.
As a compressionist, if you don't mind me pointing out, like it is a shootout, it's going to be 8K until something moves, because that's very, very compressed. Yeah. So still graphics, still photos, absolutely. But I mean, we were looking, I think after the event, we pulled up, someone pulled up some YouTube clips, and yeah, it's compressed. Let's
highly compressed that by the time anything moves, you're not seeing 8K resolution anymore.
Right. That's right. But please, if I may add also,
yes,
if you care about photography, if that's a hobby as it is for me, there's a lot of 8K prosumer cameras, and even Samsung has a cell phone that's native 8K HDR right in the cell phone. So you can create your own native 8K content. I shot our son's wedding 2 years ago during COVID in our backyard with a native 8K camera that I borrowed. And we played it back on the ZX, and I swear I thought I belonged in Hollywood. The image quality was ridiculously great.
Wow.
It's really beautiful to see native 8K. And we spoiled everybody by showing pure, true native 8K.
Oh, that is kind of spoiling people, I think, yes.
Yes.
AVS Forum, whoever that is in the AVS Forum, I shoot my videos in 8K right now.
That's right.
And it's a good idea to shoot in 8K if you can.
That's right.
Because even if you're going to downscale it, it's going to look better.
Absolutely. Yes.
Than if you shoot in native 4K, or even worse, in 1080p and then try to upscale it.
No good.
Yeah, exactly. So you looked at some native 8K content, but you also looked at 4K content and allowed the TVs to do the upscaling. Is that correct?
Yes.
because that's going to be really important too. Most content is 4K or lower. So you have to be able to judge the 8K TVs on their ability to upscale.
Yes. Thank you.
And Jason, we had a different system set up for that. I think the next slide will show that.
Yeah, and basically what we did, because we needed more than one input, we just went back to the previous day. We went back to that setup, sure. And we were feeding the 4K content through the same switch as the day before, the AC MX-88. So we didn't really do anything too outside of the box here. We just went back to how we had it set up the day before. Same cables and all that fun stuff. Oh, the Beatmaster, he says, I bet Jason loves HDCP. It's funny.
Don't we all love HDCP?
Yeah. And, and quite honestly, I mean, it is kind of an inside joke with all of us. It's all because when you start working on distributed systems like this, especially, it's always EDID and HDCP that give us the most headaches. But I will say, shameless plug, with some of the Murideo test gear, it's kind of easy to troubleshoot the HDCP issues that most people run into. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's sort of the bane of most integrators' existence. And it's either HDCP or EDID every time there's a problem in a distributed system. So it's funny he pointed that out.
Mm-hmm. And rightly so.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take a look at the judging criteria for 8K, which is the next slide. Very similar to 4K, tone mapping and HDR and so on. You were looking at all the same basic criteria, Robert, right?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. With different test patterns and content. But
right.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and then we have a couple pictures of the actual process. Here we have somebody looking very closely, right up close next to the 8K, which is something that, is important to do with 8K because, man, you need to get up, you need to put your nose on the glass to really see the pixels, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that one of the 8K displays could not actually resolve full 8K resolution.
Really?
And we didn't have a test pattern for that, but it was visible quite visible, as you say, when you're sitting really close to it, and especially in synthetic parts of the picture. Like one of the test clips had a little 8K logo added to the top right of the image, and that's like a perfectly created digital graphic. So you have a very hard edge transition around the text, around the edges of the logo, which that I thought was interesting.
Yeah. John, any comment on 8K in that regard? I'm sorry, Jason, my apologies.
Oh, no. And David, not really too much to add to him, but what I will say is some of the clips that we looked at, you could see in that particular clip, it was like the face of a tiger, and that was the content provided by, provided by Sony. And man, I mean, just especially looking at an animal like that, just seeing the hairs and stuff. I mean, I feel like every time we have a format change, it's like, man, how much clearer can it get? And
right.
It's crazy. And when you look at that fine of detail that close to the screen, and you can still resolve things like whiskers on a tiger, it's pretty incredible. And we had some other really great clips from Sony too. One of them was a similar shot with I think it was a puma. There was also a shot with a sloth in the jungle, and it's so crazy because I feel like we keep saying this over and over and over again. It's like it's looking out of a window, but it's going to get to a point here.
We said that about 1080p.
I remember. I mean, it was funny. I remember looking at 1080p for the first time and saying the exact same thing. But now we're seeing the higher resolution with the wider color gamuts, with the high dynamic range, and it's getting to a point now where it's just incredible. And Robert made a great point before. When you can take your own photos that are shot at high resolution of your family and your vacation, and it just really brings you back to that moment. And that's one of the things that's so special about it. When you put some pictures of your family up on this giant screen with high resolution, the kids just go crazy. Oh, look, that's when we were doing this, and that's when we were doing that. So to me, when you get to this level, it's of course movies, TV shows, video games, and things like that. But I'm with Robert as a sort of photography enthusiast myself. Seeing your high resolution photos like that, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
That's going to be the main source, really, isn't it? I mean, gaming is probably going to be the first driver, but obviously, still cameras have been shooting what resolution are we at now? They've been shooting way higher resolution
crazy.
than display panels
Even
can
than
show
8K,
for a long
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So looking at your stuff like that is going to be really cool. For me, especially as someone who kind of lives a bit in the film world, because they deal a lot with back catalog content. I'm not sure how much. Obviously, we have decades worth of material that exists mainly on 35 millimeter film, right? I think these debates go on in film circles. I'm not sure what the exact number is. Right now, I'm very happy with the amount of detail you can pull out of like a 35 millimeter camera negative and show in 4K. So it does make me wonder with 8K, where's the content going to come from? It's going to be, like I said, it's not like the introduction of 1080p or 720p or anything like that, where you had all this stuff on film that could be scanned and ready to go.
Right.
Obviously, there's nothing to stop you scanning 35 millimeter film and finishing it in 8K. But I wonder how big the difference is going to be there.
Exactly. I've heard. I don't know. Tell me what you think. I've heard the number that, generally speaking, 35 millimeter film kind of maxes out at 6K.
That's what I heard too. I was going to say that, but didn't want to put it in my mouth in
take
case I was wrong.
I'll take
it's going to be, well, no, it's going to be mainly like finer, slightly different rendering of film grain, which obviously
now 70 millimeter film can probably go,
yes,
you can probably derive 8K out of that.
Yeah. And
exactly.
also, if I may,
yes,
all the cinematographers I've spoken to, and I speak to many of them, we sell to that broadcast industry, have shot for years now in 8K. And they dumb it down to 4K and even lower for mastering it. But they have a lot of content ready right now in 8K.
And there are cameras that are now doing more than 8K.
That's right. That's correct.
So,
didn't somebody just post Red's 28K camera?
Yeah, AVS Forum just said 28K camera from Red.
Right. Thank you. That's correct.
So I get asked this all the time. What's next? Are we going to have 16K TVs, 32K TVs, 64K TVs? I mean, when does it stop? When does the human visual system, it no longer makes any difference if you go higher resolution? I think 8K is already there at a normal distance, at a normal seating distance. Right. But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that too.
Yeah. Also, one thing. It's not just resolution, but color and fidelity and
good point.
Volume and motion resolution, contrast.
Those are more important.
Bit depth is so important. So there's
we had this
for us to go.
Sorry to interrupt you there. We had this discussion actually at the shootout, and the general consensus we all came to was that the resolution of 8K itself is not necessarily going to be the best part. It's going to be that the manufacturers, now that that's out there, their best panels are going to include 8K resolution as a feature. So if you want the best contrast ratio and the best gamut and all that extra stuff, they're going to bundle 8K into it. So if you want the best panel, you're probably going to have to buy an 8K one anyway in the years that come. Which I personally, I'm a big fan of one-to-one mapping. I love the idea of being able to watch, all the UHD Blu-ray content I master and all that stuff with no scaling going on whatsoever. No, just one-to-one mapping.
Right.
And obviously, when you're changing the resolution, there's going to be scaling up or down. Up in this case, either way. So I'm going to be enjoying really good 4K displays for a little while, I think. But 8K is cool, very cool for gaming and stuff like that.
Right. Jason, you agree?
Yeah, I do. And, I just, make sure everybody's kind of on the same page with this. Remember the HDMI 2.1 spec tops out at 10. So, and we might, HDMI 3.0, 25 years from now, or, however long that takes. We might be at 16K and that's certainly a valid question. And none of us know that answer. But if we're going to end up topping out with using the full 48 gigs, we're going to be in the 10K world. And one of the great things about this version of HDMI is they built it with a ton of headroom, and I hate the word future-proof, but in a lot of ways future-resistant. So eventually, we'll be past 10K, but I don't know when that's going to happen, and it might be a very long time from now. But I'll just kind of parrot what everybody else is saying. Once we get to a point with spatial resolution, then the other things we can really shine. And that's what we're hoping the manufacturers do. For example, I think I mentioned the other day when we were doing that panel together, there's been so many advancements now in heat sinks that allow the TVs to get brighter. So, we may be at a point where, yeah, we might stop at 8K for several years, but we're still going to go more luminance. We're still going to go more HDR. We're still going to go more color. We're still going to go deeper bit depths and uncompressed color and all these other things. So, yeah, are we hitting a limit right now at 8K? Maybe, and quite honestly, probably. So now that we're at that point, and that seems to me, if you're a TV manufacturer, and I'm not, but that seems to me like that's almost the easiest part. Now let's concentrate on the other qualities of picture, dynamic range, color saturation, color accuracy. Now that we're here for resolution, let's concentrate on the other things and really start to let these TVs shine.
100%. And I remember we had the exact same discussions near the end of the days where 1080p was the best thing. And we were all saying, what we need is better pixels, not more pixels.
Right.
But I think it's with resolution. I'd like to know exactly what the main kind of business driver of increasing the resolution is. I think it's the one thing that the average consumer has in mind when they're buying a TV. Like Correct. They all know, like, for example, I like to ask people like, I think the average person now knows like what 360p, 480p, 1080p means. Ask how many of them actually can tell you what the P stands for. It's an interesting discussion to have. And it's like a bigger number is better, right?
This is my surmise with regard to why they went from 1080p to 4K to 8K and maybe beyond. Hey, it's a bigger number. It's got to be better. And it's the 100%. Easiest thing for consumers to understand 100%. More than bit depth or color volume or, high brightness. That's a little easier to understand, but still.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Now that, sorry, do you mind if I
sorry,
goes first?
If you take a 8K or a 4K logo and slap it on the side of the box, that's one thing. Everybody says, "Oh, more resolution." I get it. But if you take if you take a logo that says 10-bit color and slap that on the side of the box, people are going to be, I don't know what this means. And so again, it's a lot of this is driven by marketing, and the manufacturer's job is to sell TVs. And if they didn't do that, we would not be sitting here having this conversation. So we can't blame them for doing things the way they do it. But but again, you framed it, Scott. I love the way you framed that. That's going to be the driver, and what most people are going to recognize.
I was going to say there, the introduction of HDR is kind of an opportunity there, though, to like from the consumer education point of view, because if you can actually specify and like as a nit value, what's the peak luminance this display can do, maybe that's a thing we could get consumers into instead. Like, hey, I've got a 10,000 nit TV. It's last year or 10 years ago, I only had a 600 nit TV. Right. Maybe that can become the new number.
Yeah, it's a number that most people can understand pretty easily.
Right.
And luckily, we have so many great reviewers out there these days who are writing just amazing articles and great reviews on TVs. And a lot of this stuff is just so accessible now. If the reviewers make that very clear, and David, I've never even thought of that before. That's an excellent point. But if the reviewers make it very clear that we've sort of hit this pinnacle of resolution, let's concentrate on the other things. So if we're looking at HDMI 2.1 and we're maxing that out at 10,000 nits, that's something that they can concentrate on when they're doing their reviews. So if you're comparing TVs now, it's not just 4K versus 8K. This is 1,000 nits. This is 4,000 nits. This is eventually going to be 10,000 nits. That very well could be. It's kind of like the conversation about horsepower in a car. So I like that. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
These VESA, not the credit card people, but VESA did that. I think didn't they introduce for computer monitors? They had there was some sort of marketing initiative to put the max luminance the display could do in they made a little logo, I'm sure, that was like rated for 400 nits or 500 nits or whatever.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
People are doing that. I don't think it's really spilled over into TVs though. Robert has a hand.
Go ahead, Robert.
May I add? So at next year's TV Shootout, I'm already starting to interview people that are specialists in the human visual system.
Excellent.
Professor. Cool. And what they're going to show us is how many f-stops the human visual system can see at different luminance levels. It's different. We see a bigger range of dynamic range in low light than we do in high light. We see a smaller dynamic range.
Yes.
It's going to be what color palette, what gamut can we see? All of the elements of imagery is going to be compared to where we are on the TVs for 2023. So we're going to show the human visual system at different luminance levels at color, fidelity, saturation, f-stops, dynamic range, every
Fantastic.
visual system compared to what the TVs are achieving.
Fantastic. Oh man, that's a great idea.
Thank
Start
you.
bringing
You
in
have to, you have to join us next
I
year.
do have to. I will join you next year. I will tell you this right now on the record. I'll come next year because that's one of my favorite
What dates you're busy, and I won't use those dates.
Okay, all right. No, it's a year from now. I think I can probably clear my schedule.
Very good.
I was sorry I wasn't able to be there this year for sure, but
Thank you.
that sounds really, really good. Okay, before we wrap up, I do want to just show the results of the 8K,
Please.
the 8K shootout. Well,
and keep in mind that we don't use the cost of the TV in our voting. We're strictly voting on picture quality.
Right, which is good.
The consumer uses the ballot to their best interests. If the winner is not in their price category, cross it off and see who's left.
Yeah.
And compare what's important to you. Is motion important to you? Use this ballot for your use case.
Right.
To pick your best TV.
Right.
Because everything is voted on. You don't have to just pick the best one that we picked.
Right. And so as we saw there a little bit ago, we'll just go over this again.
Yes.
The LG OLED, the most expensive TV, not taking price into account, but it is the most expensive one of these three, did win this shootout, the 8K shootout. It got all three categories in reference mode. It got 2 out of 3 in day mode. And it got most of the categories. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 8 categories in HDR reference mode. And what was second? I can't. Was it the Sony that was second?
Sony's new Master Series, the Mini LED, the Z9K was second.
And David, what did you think about the spread in this case? Was it also very narrow as it was in the 4K?
Again, it came down to emissive versus not for me. I mean, the OLED panel versus the LCD. The two LCDs were more similar to each other, but the big jump in performance was LCD versus OLED.
That's right. That is correct.
And Robert agrees with that. Jason, you too?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're looking at two different things, and both of them are good at a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, it is two different things. It's not apples and oranges. It's not that much of a difference, but the way the light is actually made and thrown out of the glass and the way our eyes take it in, emissive displays our eyes are most sensitive to contrast. And will we get there with micro LED and some of these other technologies like dual layer LCD? I think so. I don't know when, but 3, 4, heck, even maybe next year, the gap will tighten a little bit on some of these. And it was quite tight now. I didn't expect it to be as tight as it was, but it was very tight.
I think the biggest advancement we saw, other than QD OLED, was Mini LED. Black.
They did a great job.
Picture. There's much less of that glow and halo. The Mini LEDs had the biggest advancement this year, other than QD OLED. They really got much
biggest
the OLED quality.
With the thing going back to Jason's point, obviously, I mean, an OLED it's a simpler structure, right? With any sort of LCD based display or whatever they branded it as this year, you always have the panel itself and then the light source. And one thing I wanted to point out earlier was during the judging for just above black details, like shadow details, in many of the cases with the LCD based displays, they were actually on the purely digital level of the panel itself. They were actually coming out of black perfectly, but the overall effect was diminished because of the blinking of the LED lights behind the panel, which is usually actually not in perfect sync with the test pattern. There's always a little bit of lag before the LED can respond. So it becomes, when you're looking at the dynamic range low pattern in an LCD based display, it becomes very apparent that there's two different things going on in there. You have the LCD panel itself, which can display those just above black shades fine, but then you have the way that the panel is actually illuminated, which in a torture test like that makes itself very apparent.
Right.
And sorry, if I could add just one more point to that too.
Of course.
Let's not forget that the mini LEDs are much brighter overall.
Right.
Yes.
Compared to an OLED, right?
Thing.
So when we look at OLED right now, it has more dynamic range, but it's not as bright. So if mini LED can get to a point where the blacks are as good as OLED, and we might see that one day, now we're talking dynamic range from 0 to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 nits and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as the mini LED technology gets better, it's probably really going to give OLED a run for its money in the next maybe few years.
Yeah.
Well, where LCD really, I'll make this quick, sorry, where it really shines, just to add to what I said before, like obviously the negative area is the darkroom performance above black, but where it really shines to what you're saying, Jason, is in really bright HDR content. You have a really kind of silky look to it when, like, if you're watching 4,000 nit content on an LCD-based display, and it can show you more of those bright details. Mm-hmm. It just looks harsher on a display that's more luminance limited, like an OLED or right now. Silky is the only way I can describe it.
It's a good way to describe it, actually.
One of the concerns for mini LED is the dot pitch. So you have to get a 220-inch screen to get 4K. 110-inch screen is 1080p.
Well, now you're talking about micro LED, right? Direct emissive.
Micro.
Right. That's another. There's another topic altogether.
Yes.
That's a whole nother.
And I might say, Robert, that might be yet another shootout for you at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Is
the
putting
prices
together
on those
micro LED, but the prices, oh my God, we're talking $1 million.
Yeah, and the space, you're going to have to do it in a warehouse as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Walk into the next room to evaluate the next display.
Well, and what I will tell you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, I just real quick on the whole point of micro LED. Yeah. We have seen some significant price drops in the past 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to hear from some of my calibrator friends and integrator friends that do a lot of high-end stuff. They're going into people's homes today. So that's going to probably give us a really good barometer, if you will, on how long it might take before they're affordable. But as you correctly pointed out, Scott, we're talking $1 million+ and some of these new ones in just 3 years are half of that now. So it'll probably be quite a bit longer, but let's also not forget, these are 16-foot wide screens. When somebody is able to make, and I think Samsung has worked on this before, at least teased us about it. If we could have a 100-inch micro LED, it's not going to be $750,000. It'll be much less than that. And as that technology progresses, like everything else does, the price will keep coming down. So we might have a 100-inch micro LED TV at the shootout in, not too far in the future.
Yeah,
we'll
a couple
see.
of years from now.
And just very quickly to favor 8K, it's not just the resolution.
Right.
400% more pixels gives you more color on the screen, gives you a brighter image, makes a better curve in a circle.
Yep.
Because you have more dots that are closer together, and that you can see further back.
Yep.
So there are several other, and they put their best processors and scalers and panels in them, and maybe to differentiate them, and it's sort of almost, malicious almost.
I don't think there's any reason why an 8K display would have better color gamut performance, for example. But to your point, they're going to put the highest end, the better panels go into the 8K product.
Whether you like it or not, if you want the best TV, it's an 8K TV.
Well, certainly you are. And what can you see from a normal distance to differentiate 8K from 4K? I think your point, Robert, is good.
Yes.
Curves, and shallow angles and so on will probably look better.
It is. You can make a better circle.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. There might even be more silkiness, to use David's term.
Yeah.
Well, if they work in the dynamic range rather than the resolution,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
I was going to say back to the point a couple points ago about mini LED LCD TVs getting brighter than OLED, which I absolutely agree with. They do. But the QD OLED is going to close that gap.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, and by the way, here's a picture of the final picture we're going to show here is the LG people accepting the award for the best, the king of 8K TVs. Robert, tell us who we're looking at here.
Thank you. That's David Park, who I believe just got promoted to be the senior director of product development at LG, and we have next to him Sam On, who's one of the engineers there. Mm-hmm. Two great LG guys. We love these people.
Yeah,
and Caleb Tennyson is next to me, of course.
Right. Classy Tech Calibrations is asking, what are the dates of the projector shootout? Do you do a projector shootout?
We do. This year we're going to be the ultra short throw. Day 1, day 2 will be the long throw. And it's still a little up in the air, but it's 90% for sure to be Saturday and Sunday, September 17th and 18th.
Oh, coming right up.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about that when the time comes.
Yes, indeed.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
I just, sorry to interject. I just remembered a point that some sort of feedback I saw about. It comes up every year with the shootout, and we get user feedback, viewer feedback saying, "Well, it's biased because the judges can see the brands of the panels, and so why don't you cover up the bezels?" And that's I mean, that's been done before, and that's certainly possible. The trouble with that is, though, first of all, people who work in post-production do not care what the brand is. I'm going to put that out there.
Yeah, they don't. They absolutely don't.
There is no brand favoritism. In my office where I do compression work, I'm sitting with Sony equipment, LG equipment, Magstore equipment, all Blackmagic Design, all these brands. I don't care what the brand name on it is, right? Secondly, though,
performance.
Performance, right. But second of all, is that even if you were to cover up the bezels, which is, I said to Robert also, number one, what bezel? The bezels are gone now.
At this point,
right.
You have to actively hunt out and see if you're going to look. But the other thing is that if you were to do that and go to some effort to try and conceal the brand, the minute the input changes, anyone who wants to be biased will be able to say, well, that's the Sony user interface. When the HDMI banner pops up, anyone who wants to be biased is going to find a way to do it.
Anybody who's familiar with and experienced in this industry is going to know which brand it is exactly right by the banner that pops up, or God forbid you pull up the menu.
Oh,
right.
Which
does happen.
There
were many points. There were many points where I said, "Can you just to satisfy my curiosity? Can you pull up the picture settings and make because they do different things? Like, for example, the Samsung LCD display at all times was doing some sort of backlight blinking, which gave it a slightly different look in motion to this is the 4K shootout, and I think also the 8K day as well. That gave it a slightly different characteristic to the motion compared to the other displays, which had all that stuff shut off. So even if something is labeled as being off in a menu, it's not necessarily off. And it's nice, to your point, it's nice to pull up the settings and just, clarify where things are at.
One last thing. This is a very long show today, and I appreciate you guys hanging out. But there was a comment early on that I wanted to make sure we got to, which was, I can't find it right now, but it regards the QD OLED and the subpixel structure being a triangle. And some people claim to see color fringing on sharp objects, sharp boundaries, and have some problems with that. And I wanted to get each of your guys' opinion on that. David, you nodded most vociferously, so we'll start with you.
Well, the first thing I do with any display tech is scrutinize the subpixel structure, like a normal person does. Because actually, do you remember years ago, there are certain subpixel structures that I just can't deal with. Like, do you remember years ago, those sharp LCD panels, they had some very interesting method going on where depending on the luminance level of the pixels being rendered, a straight line would be rendered as a sort of triangle. Yep. So you would get a sort of, what was meant to be a straight line in the content gave it a sort of jaggy edge, and for computer use that drove it. Anyway, gone off on a tangent, as I often do. The Samsung display engineers were there, and I actually grabbed them and asked them, like,
at the
not in a negative way. Yes, not in a negative way. Just like why choose the subpixel structure that you do? Because that's entirely correct. It's not RGB stripe. It is a triangular arrangement where I think the green one, the green subpixel is on top, and then there's a red and a blue below that.
Yep.
And someone's phone just pinged. It's a triangular arrangement, and I was surprised when I took a quick little macro photo of it with my camera phone, like how much of it's black, and you can't, like, a lot of it, because it's a triangular arrangement. they're like square units almost, but in the subpixels within those are in a triangular arrangement. So there is like a decent amount of unused space, but you can't tell when you're looking at the panel because the resolution of 4K is so high. The engineers told me, and this was really interesting to me, that they picked that specific subpixel arrangement to maximize the color gamut performance of the panel. And I had never considered that would be why, but it was picked that way for a reason. And yes, you can see if you're looking at like synthetic content, like a test pattern with a white background and a gray box. It's one of the first things I noticed. You can see a little colored line where the luminance changes. And this is always the thing. It will appear in real content at some point because it's what the panel does. I could never pick it out on any photorealistic content. You'd have to have a really, really, I can't think of any, like graphics on news channels might be the thing, like synthetic content. Photorealistic images, you're never going to be able to see that, I don't think.
It was Classy Tech Calibrations. We showed that up on the screen. And they say triangle shape is probably my biggest complaint with QD-OLED. I do see the fringing on the edges of the black bars or in high contrast objects.
Right.
Jason, have you seen that?
I've not seen it myself, and I think it's just a visual acuity thing. If I were wondering this myself, I probably honestly would call up Dave and say, "Hey, Dave, what do you think about this?" But here's what I will tell you. One thing I like to do when looking at a display for the first time, and Dave was there with me and a few others too, but I don't understand the pixel structure stuff nowhere near as much as some of these guys, but I still like to see it, which I think is really cool. And you can go on Amazon and you can buy the one that I use. It's a little $11 adjustable little sort of magnifying glass, if you will. And it's still really cool for me to see it at that level. And Dave's right, man. Over the years, we've seen a lot of different structures and a lot of different colors in the structures that you wouldn't expect to be there. But as far as like how it performs, how it affects video performance and things like that, I've never needed to ask the question because I've just never seen it before personally. So.
While we're on the subject, also, it's not just QD-OLED that has some kind of novel subpixel structure. The 8K LCD panels had, I noticed that Sony and Samsung were doing quite different things. And I can't remember which one of them it was, but they were also doing, if you look really closely at a synthetic edge, you'd see a little zigzag pattern. The thing is that resolution, you can't really see it. Like, do you remember when we were all really concerned with stuck pixels or pixel defects on flat panel plasma LCD? And then they didn't necessarily, they'd start to go away a little bit. They're still around, but the main thing that changed was the resolution started getting so much higher that if you have a stuck red or green or whatever subpixel on like a 4K or higher flat panel display, you're probably not aware it's there. When the pixels get so much smaller, it becomes less of an issue. It's the same sort of thing with subpixel structures, but that's a fascinating concept. Like, how does the subpixel structure interact with the perceived resolution of the content? Another thing that I noticed with the LCDs is if you look at really bright areas, and I believe this was in the Samsung panel, you can see a sort of diagonal crosshatch pattern. And I think that must be some sort of anti-reflective coating or something else that's on the panel. So that to me, this stuff is fascinating. Like, how do the physical attributes of the panel clash in a way with, to use a dramatic term, how does it clash with the pixels in the content themselves?
And let's all remember, this is very minimal. You got to get up real close and be pixel picking to really see this at all. And it's very rare and very, very rare content that it even appears. And you got to be very close to the screen.
This is the story of my life. And when I was a reviewer, I would write things that I thought were interesting in reviews on HDTV tests and AV forums that were just for my own whimsical musing of, oh, that's interesting. That's how the panel works. And the default interpretation of it was often, well, this must be a negative thing if he's mentioning it. No, it's not necessarily negative. It's just that I'm really interested in how these things work. This is something I've observed. In the terms of color, you mentioned the way the subpixel structure in the QD-OLED panels interacts with certain content. That is that again, I'm talking about this because I'm a nerd and I love this stuff and I find it interesting.
Right.
It's not even compared to the various other performance attributes, like the improved viewing angle and the improved luminance. It's not even a blip in my radar with those.
Mm-hmm.
If I buy a QTL display, I'm aware that that's how the display panel works. But when it comes to enjoying content, it's going to be about the various positive things.
Sure. John Riformato, by the way, is in the chat room, and he's saying closed captionings. You can see it in closed captioning. Okay.
Because there you have a high contrast edge, and I think in the U.S. as well, the closed captions are usually white text against the black box. Actually, in Europe as well, white text in the black box. So that's going to be where you'll
see it most
obvious.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, listen, we have had a wonderful time here. I want to thank you all for being here. Congratulations, Robert, on another successful shootout, TV shootout, and the results are in, and it's very exciting to know that this new technology overall is exceptional and not all that much more expensive than other technologies. So we're very happy about that. Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm so happy to be joining you today. And thank you to all who are watching. And of course, David and Jason, thank you.
Yes. And Jason, I want to thank you for being here and doing all the last minute calibration on a couple things and running the show from behind the scenes there. I think that was a super important job. So thanks so much for
about behind the scenes. I think we have Chris behind the scenes today.
We have Chris Mata behind the scenes, our technical director. That home theater dude, there he is. Thank you so much, Chris. And David, I want to thank you for being here. We've known each other for many years, and you've always been great to be on the podcast and have all sorts of great things to say. So thank you for being here as well.
Thank you. Just wish I could flap my mouth about display tech for another hour, but
well, I know we all could, but we do have.
I mean, we got time. I mean, we could just charge a little extra, then we're good to go. We'll keep the tape rolling.
No, I think we're good for now. But I'd love to have you all back at another time to flap your jaws more about display tech, because that is totally my thing as well.
Very good.
So thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to all of you for watching, and we will see you next time. Until then, geek out.
Geek out.
Bye.